Hello, friends. Today, I will tell you the secret of those who see the unseen. Because most of us only see life with our eyes, but reality is not as simple as it seems. You may have noticed, when some people wish for something, the universe seems to instantly approve their wish. Some things happen quickly in a way that is not coincidental. And sometimes we feel like time has stopped. So why do some people experience manifestations faster? It's not just positive thinking behind it. It's a technique. It's a mindset. And it's about remembering the connection between consciousness and the universe. In this video, you will see that the mind is not actually a wish machine, but a system of choice and adjustment. You will understand how the rhythms between the brain, heart, and universe are synchronized. And most importantly, we will scientifically and logically unravel why manifestation sometimes happens frighteningly fast. This video won't just tell you, imagine it and it will happen. It will explain why, show you which mechanisms are at work, and make you realize that you too can control it. Now take a deep breath, because what I'm about to tell you will redefine the limits of your mind. Ready? Let's begin. For many years, the human mind was defined as a structure that thinks, decides, and produces reactions, as if it were a closed circuit passively receiving information from the outside world, processing it, and producing results. However, developments in both modern neuroscience and physics over the last century have gradually revealed that this definition is profoundly incomplete. Because our mind is not just a reacting system, it is also an active receiver that constantly adjusts itself and interacts with its environment. To understand this, we must first accept a very basic fact. The brain is both a chemical and a dynamic organ. Thoughts, emotions, and memories are formed by electromagnetic signals and rhythmic wave patterns that occur between temperatures. In other words, our mind, like a radio, operates at specific frequencies. And as with a radio, the frequency we are tuned to determines what we perceive and what we completely ignore. This is where the concept of perceptual range comes into play. Perceptual range is a visible filter that determines which information the mind will perceive differently, which aspects it will see. Thousands of stimuli pass through our environment throughout the day. However, we experience only a very small fraction of these as real. This isn't because there isn't enough data from the outside world, but because the mind can't process everything at once. Therefore, the body makes choices, and these choices are usually not hidden. Brainwaves are the key to this choice. Scientifically, the different consumption of human energy occurs at different wave frequencies. Beta waves represents the everyday state of consciousness, associated with stress, intense thinking, and analysis, the constantly busy mind state. Alpha waves, associated with relaxation, peace, and creativity, a state of detachment from the outside world and going with the flow, the beginning level of meditation and relaxation. Theta waves, connected to deep insight, intuition, and the subconscious, seen during daydreaming, dreaming, and inner self-reflection, the source of new ideas and inner awareness. Delta waves, associated with the deepest subconscious and sleep state. This is a period of intense unconscious processes. Subconscious repair and inner renewal occur here. Most people are expected to spend almost their entire lives in a beta wave state, a state of mind constantly thinking, calculating, and trying to carry the past and future simultaneously. However, many creative insights, sudden different tasks, and experiences that arise as coincidence occur when the brain shifts to slower waves. In other words, when the mind calms down, the field of perception expands. This shows us that the mind is not only a center that produces information, but also a gateway open to influences. The more tense, conditioned, and susceptible to manipulation it is, the more its perception of reality narrows. The calmer, more orderly, and more harmonious it is, the more connections it makes. This connection doesn't need to make a metaphysical claim. It's entirely about its functioning. Many scientists argue that consciousness is not a causal byproduct, but a dynamic process constantly exchanging data with the environment. There is a continuous feedback loop between the brain, the body, and the environment. Heart rate, breathing, pauses, even the environment of separation, all affect the mind's operating frequency. Therefore, the mind is not a single center, it is a nodal point. The real question is, if the mind is a receiver, to what are we tuning it? Because most people never question the fragmentation of their minds. Fears, abilities, past experiences, and social conditions determine the degree of perception. Then, the person believes that only what they see in this narrow field is real. But as perception expands, so does reality. Opportunities become more visible, changes become more apparent, and a sense of order begins to prevail, that events do not happen by chance. Herein lies the paradox of manifestation. Manifestation is not a magical wish, or sending a desire to the universe. That is a malfunction of the mind's mechanism. The person begins to perceive more clearly the things they focus on. With the change in perception, experiences also change. Because the things that enter our lives are often not new. They are simply closer than we have ever seen before. Therefore, our mind is more powerful than we think. But this power comes not from controlling it, but from adapting to it. When the mind quietens, perception speaks. When the fat is reduced, appearances emerge, and one begins to connect with one's inner world and the universe far more than you can imagine. In the next section, we will address precisely this point and examine the following question. Chapter 2. Does thought follow reality, or does reality follow thought? Reversing the perception of causality. The human mind almost unquestioningly accepts one of the most reliable concepts for making sense of the world: causality. Something happens first, then we think about it. Reality exists first, thought follows. Our daily experiences seem to support this perception. It rains and we get wet. Something is said and we feel something. An event occurs and then we generate thoughts about it. However, at the intersection of science, psychology, and philosophy, this line is not so clear. In fact, some lines are completely reversed. First, we must acknowledge that the brain is not a camera that perceives the outside world as it is. It is a system that constantly makes predictions, complements information, and produces meaning. Neuroscience research shows that the brain does not passively wait for data from the environment, but rather constantly continues to produce answers to the question, what will happen next? In other words, thought often precedes reality. It does not follow it. As a preparation, an expectation, and a framework. This allows us to understand how perception is shaped. It is no coincidence that two people witnessing the same event derive completely different meanings from it. This is because the thought patterns, beliefs, and expectations they held in their minds before the event filter everything that happens in different ways. Reality may be singular. However, perceived reality is always plural. And this plurality clearly demonstrates the active role of thoughts. In psychology, this is called a cognitive frame. People read the world through these frames. If one person perceives an illegal place as dangerous, the consequences become a threat to them. In the same situation, another person may experience it as an opportunity. The event is the same. However, the change creates the possibility of experiencing reality. At this point, causality begins to reverse. It is thought that shapes reality, not realistic thought. On the physics front, this issue becomes even more problematic. Experiments at the quantum level have shown that observation has an effect on the outcome. The behavior of a particle changes depending on whether it is measured or not. This shouldn't be confused with a superficial interpretation like human thought directly creates matter. Rather, it clearly demonstrates that observation is not a passive act. To observe means to be part of the system. And this allows us to consider how intertwined the mind is with reality. From this, we make the critical observation. If even observation changes the outcome, where should we place thought as the precursor to observation? Because people not only notice what is happening, they also determine what that difference is. Attention is the point to which thought is directed, and attention is almost always directed towards energy. This constant focusing of the mind leads to experiencing more reality in different areas. This is not a miraculous way of the world. It is the selective nature of perception. People begin to notice connections they hadn't seen before, but which already existed. This is why the idea of manifestation works so disturbingly fast. Thought isn't about sending a will to the universe and waiting. Thought changes the degree of perception. In a change in perception, changes occur. When there is a change in behavior, the results also change. However, this process is so complex that people often fail to notice the intermediate steps, and the result is labeled as coincidence or luck. The real transformation occurs in the perception of time. People often think, "I'll think about it later. It will happen first." But often, they think about it first, and it happens later. However, this is not a sentence that remains in thought. It functions as an expectation, an emotion, an acceptance, or a fear. And the mind, in order to maintain its internal performance, better displays lives that are in harmony with these thoughts. Therefore, the line of causality is not as straight as we think. There is no one-way relationship between thought and reality. There is a cyclical and constantly updated communication. The individual is both affected by and influenced by the situation. And in this process, the person can be seen as a passive observer, and the experience they live becomes a hidden reality. Perhaps the most striking conclusion is this: we don't need to leave everything out to change reality. Sometimes it is enough to notice which thought we are looking through, because thought is not just an idea circulating in the mind. It is a lens through which we see reality. Chapter 3. What changes? When the heart and brain harmonize, rhythm, focus, and personal regulation. Many people perceive themselves as merely a thinking brain. They accept their decisions, assuming there are side effects circulating around them. However, physiology presents a very different picture. The brain is not a single, isolated center. It is in constant dialogue with the heart, nervous system, hormones, and even the rhythm of breathing. When this dialogue becomes harmonious, that is, when the heart and brain enter the same rhythmic state, many things change, from a person's perception to their decision-making process. But the way this change occurs also changes. The heart is not just a mechanical organ that pumps. It has a powerful structure that encompasses the space created in the body, and this space is foldable. The nervous system, particularly through the vagus nerve, constantly carries corrective information from the heart to the brain. In other words, the flow of information is not one way. The heart also influences the brain's functioning until the brain controls it. At this point, what we call heart-brain sleep occurs. Heart-brain sleep is a state where the heartbeat is regular and rhythmic, and brain waves are strong and not scattered. When this harmony occurs, mental noise decreases. Thoughts become clearer, emotions become more general, and attention becomes more focused. People become clearer, not because they want to be calmer, but because the body and mind meet on the same timeline. This is not temporary relief, but a game of how things work. Focus plays a key role here. The heartbeat has a regular rhythm. The heart rate increases. Breathing becomes shallower, and the brain is constantly stimulated. In this state, the person perceives every stimulus from the outside world as a threat or distraction. However, when the heart rate slows and becomes regular, breathing deepens, and the body receives a safety signal, the brain adapts to these signals. Focus ceases to be a forced discipline. It becomes a natural state. One of the interesting consequences of this adaptation is the change in the perception of time. People interested in heart-brain visualizations often describe experiences such as time flew by, or everything felt slower but clearer. This is because the brain constantly stops separating itself from the past and future and focuses more deeply on the present situation. When the mind remains in the moment, it doesn't divide energy. This leads to sharper perception. This is where the concept of personal organization comes into play. It can be difficult for a person to keep the external world under control. However, once the regulation of the internal rhythm is learned, the influence of external conditions increases surprisingly. Living with heart and brain is like an individual reaching the tuning of their own system. Emotions are not suppressed, details are not silenced, but everything begins to be managed from the same center, from the same rhythm. This creates an internal system. This harmony directly affects decision-making processes. Decisions made by a harmonious system are generally more certain because they are not only logical, but also supported by the signals they emit. You can understand more clearly why a person wants something. As the internal parts calm down, indecision decreases. The heart and brain don't say one thing. They both point in the same direction. Therefore, whether it's manifestation or goal setting, growth accelerates at this point. A disorganized system cannot clarify its formations. When a mind that clearly expresses what it wants struggles with a body that fears it, the result is chaotic. However, when heart-brain harmony is achieved, it stems from a single, centrally focused intention. This accelerates the process of thought, turning into action, and clarifies performance. People progress faster, not because they force themselves, but because they don't contradict themselves. Here, you need to correct an important misunderstanding. Heart-brain harmony is not exclusive to special people, mystical experiences, or long periods of time. It is a natural capacity of the nervous system. Even just a few minutes of breathing in a quiet environment, paying attention to the body, and maintaining emotional calm can open the door to this harmony. It's not about technique, it's about rhythm. As a result, when heart and brain harmony is achieved, a person becomes not only more peaceful, but also more holistic. Thought, emotion, and body begin to support each other, ceasing to sabotage one another. And at this point, the person realizes true power lies not in thinking more, but in a more harmonious state. Because a person with a regular inner rhythm makes a better impression on the outside world. Chapter 4. Why success happens faster in some people. Differences in attention, belief, inner resilience, and endurance. The same goal appears before the eyes of two thoughtful individuals. One, as if supported by life itself, quickly reaches the goal, while the other remains stuck in the same place for months, or even longer. This difference in speed is often explained with labels such as luck, fate, or innate talent. The reason for innate talent is related to who is raising the child. That is, a child may be raised to be bolder and more intelligent without realizing it, but that's a separate issue. Our main focus is how a person can achieve the goal they desire. However, behind this difference in speed lie much more tangible, measurable, and teachable reasons. The reason success happens faster in some people is that they operate with a different mental and neural adaptation. Pay attention to the first, and perhaps most important factor. The brain doesn't prioritize everything at once. It focuses on the area you direct your attention to. Neuroscience clearly demonstrates this. Consistently focused thoughts create stronger synaptic structures in the brain. This alters perception. Some people focus clearly, calmly, and repeatedly on details, not just occasionally and scattered. For these individuals, opportunities become more visible because their brains are filtered in that direction. Two people in the same environment might bump into each other without noticing, one looking at the door while the other doesn't see it. This is due to the adjustment of attention, not the difference in environment. The second important factor is belief, but here we are talking about internal integrity, not blind belief. The brain either ignores or suppresses data that contradicts what it believes. When a person says they want something while being held captive, if they are subconsciously carrying messages like, "This isn't for me," "I'm not suitable for this," or "This isn't safe," the system enters into an internal conflict. This conflict causes the energy to dissipate. The rapid flow of manifestation means there is less of an outlet between their thoughts and emotional bodies. Their desires are also internally accepted. This speeds up the process because the system is not restricted. The third factor is internal resistance. The human mind wants to maintain the order it's accustomed to. In psychology, this is called homeostasis. The system tries to maintain balance by changing differences. A new goal, a new identity, or a new way of life can be perceived as a threat to the subconscious. Some people unconsciously resist this internal resistance. Others don't panic when resistance arises, and the system is gradually retrained. People who achieve quick results are generally more resistant to change. Their minds proceed step by step, rather than all or nothing. This doesn't alarm the nervous system. The fourth type of resistance, and one often seen in those who avoid it, is psychological and emotional resistance rather than physical resistance. People who achieve quick results generally don't immediately give up or complain when results are delayed. The brain can alter its creativity and breadth of perception under intense stress. A mind that constantly asks, why didn't it work, locks its essence into a state of deficiency without knowing the answer. For resilient individuals, this process is seen not as a personal failure, but as a natural process of systemic integration. This perspective ensures the conservation of mental energy. In difficult situations, they ask themselves, how can I do this? They ask questions and don't give up. Sometimes they let go, then they come back and solve the problem. At this point, a critical emergency arises. The brain reshapes itself according to repeated emotional states. This is called neuroplasticity. When states of hope, calmness, and trust are repeated frequently, the brain begins to accept this state as the default mode. The reason some people get results faster is that this default mode is actually predetermined. This is not a miracle. It is the result of long-term mental processes. Another critical difference is the relationship with the body. Some people live their thoughts without considering their bodies. However, the subconscious speaks most quickly in the body. If an internal goal is constantly felt in the body through tension, discomfort, or avoidance, this is considered a disharmony in the system. Those who get results faster have learned to regulate changes rather than suppress them. Breathing, pausing, resting, and relaxing are important, because when the body calms down, the mind also clears. In fact, our bodies communicate with us. If we have an ailment, we don't need to take medication immediately. Stop and calmly try to understand what went wrong, because the question is with you. Ask yourself. Identity perception also plays a role. People often act according to how they see themselves, rather than who they actually are. A mindset that sees itself as struggling, unlucky, or always late unconsciously gravitates towards experiences that reinforce this identity. Conversely, some people see themselves as adaptable, learners, and progressive. This identity shapes their actions and decisions. Here, the manifestation accelerates because the individual has already mentally approached the state they wish to be in. In short, the faster processing of some manifestations stems not from an alternative ability, but from a balance between attention, belief, internal resistance, and resilience. Maintaining this balance is not fixed. It can be learned, developed, and readjusted. The real difference is not who wants it more, but who is internally less contradictory. Because when the system is not synchronized, the flow naturally accelerates. Chapter 5. Intuition, coincidence, or accelerated information, subconscious data processing, and early detection. Intuition is often described as a mystical feeling, an inexplicable inner voice, or pure coincidence. However, modern neuroscience and psychology suggest that intuition may be the result of a large flow of information that the brain processes without bringing it to a conscious level. The human brain unconsciously records thousands of micro details throughout the day. Over 60,000 thoughts come to mind. Facial expressions, tones of voice, the emotional atmosphere of the environment, traces of past experiences, and recurring patterns. While conscious awareness transforms only a very small fraction of this information into thoughts, the vast majority is rapidly analyzed subconsciously. Tests conducted by renowned neurologists show that neurological activity in the brain related to a decision appears seconds before the person feels they have consciously accepted that decision. That is, the essence of the decision has already formed in our brain long before we arrive at it. This means that when we feel something, we are actually believing in the result of programming. a kind of analysis that the brain has done much earlier. Regardless of the ability to see the future, intuition means the rapid piecing together of accumulated recorded information from the past and transforming it into a meaningful signal. Therefore, it often seems illogical. However, it's the processing of a small clue in the region or country within seconds and the resulting performance. One of the clearest examples of this mechanism is the move selection of chess masters. A master feels the right move the moment they look at the board, because thousands of moves and their traces have accumulated in the brain over the years. What is observed is not just a picture, but a rapid reenactment of countless scenarios experienced in the past. Similarly, an internist can sense something is wrong the first time they see a patient. This is not a mystical ability. Individual small indicators in the brain, breathing, facial expression, pauses, skin color, rhythm of speech, similar cases in the past, are matched within seconds to create a risk signal. The same principle forms the basis of a mother's teaching method, understanding that something is different. Over the years, small observations accumulated about the child create a model in the mother's consciousness, and this model instantly detects even the slightest deviation. This shows that intuition is not a message from the future, but an accelerated interpretation of the past. Thus, the secret to skillfully performing a task and succeeding is often summarized in the 10,000-hour rule. Because we accumulate experience repeatedly in the same field over a certain period, the brain combines these experiences to form a pattern. Over time, this pattern becomes clearer, more stable, and works faster. Now, the pieces are not thought about, but rather taken with accuracy. What is important in this process is, intuition is not a hidden power that a person possesses from birth. It is an information processing system that works with the speed of the brain as a result of repeated and intermittent accumulation of information in a field. And in this way, it is not just about accumulating information. The computer automatically divides these units into accuracy rates. From this perspective, intuition actually works like a navigation system. As a person clarifies what they want, the subconscious begins to select signals from the environment that are more quickly aligned with that goal. This leads to an increase in events that we describe as suddenly appearing before me, or happening right then and there. This is because the mind is no longer scanning randomly, but at a specific frequency. What seems like coincidence is often just an acceleration of perception. Therefore, people with strong intuition notice events faster. This is not because they receive special messages from the universe, but because they are more in tune with their inner world and listen to their subconscious data instead of suppressing it. Here, intuition is not prophecy. It is a profoundly human ability born from a combination of experience, attention, and inner silence. And it is precisely this that accelerates its manifestation. Not the arrival of information, but the earlier recognition of that information. Chapter 6. Why silence is the most powerful trigger. Mental clarity when noise diminishes. For most people, silence is perceived simply as the absence of sound. However, the freedom of a mental perspective is one of the rare moments offered by the brain's true programming. The constant stimuli of daily life, background noise, conversations, images, inner monologues, keep the mind in survival mode. In this mode, the brain works quickly but superficially. Deep connection, meaning-making, and decomposition are relegated to the background. With decreasing efficiency, the mind abandons its defense mechanisms and begins to expand its scope. In fact, silence creates a space that allows the brain to reorganize. Because the brain constantly uses a large portion of its energy to store and hold external stimuli in a ready-to-respond mode, creating, deciding, reacting, forming fears, organizing dimensions. All these parts allow the mind to operate automatically, but they also shut down deep understanding. However, silence slows down these automatic parts and activates the brain's deep processing part. Silence stems from the brain confronting its own inner voice. This confrontation is often uncomfortable because people constantly prefer to hear the truth within themselves. But silence is about losing the moments when the mind wears a mask. True desires, fears, goals, and purposes emerge from the perspective of the day. Therefore, silence is like a kind of mental detox. It's difficult at first, but later provides a purifying freshness. That's why the 90-day rule isn't just a disciplinary rule applied when starting a project or setting a new goal. It's also a period for the mind to adjust to silence. Because for 90 days, withdrawing from unnecessary and time-consuming activities, being alone, working, experimenting, and clearing the inner world of external stimuli allows the mind to hear its own voice again. For the first few weeks, this process seems pointless to most people. They can't get rid of their old mental cells and feel uncomfortable in their freedom. However, over time, a routine develops from the repetition of the same day, and this routine allows the brain to develop a new setting. Instead of constantly seeking external stimuli, the brain finds its own internal rhythm and develops goal-oriented thinking at a deeper level. At this point, the difference experienced at the end of 90 days is not just an outwardly visible success. It is a tangible success within the mind. Because silence isn't just about silencing the outside world. It's also about allowing the mind to react instead of think, expanding the space from which thought originates. In this process, people realize that achieving a goal isn't just about effort, but also about the mind working at the right frequency. The real change isn't about doing almost exactly what you did at the same time of the previous year after 90 days. It's about seeing the mind become calmer, clearer, and more resolute as it approaches the same goal. Therefore, silence is not a luxury for success. It's a necessity for accessing the depths of the mind, because the real difference begins not with the nature of the noise, but with the silence of the voice in the mind. Neuroscience studies have shown that silent environments activate what we call the brain's default mode network. This network allows a person to connect with themselves, their past experiences, and possible future scenarios. In other words, the mind doesn't empty itself in silence. Rather, it brings together scattered pieces. It's no coincidence that many scientists, writers, and inventors' most powerful ideas come to them during walks, moments of solitude, or long periods of silence. In those moments, the mind works effortlessly and without pressure. From a manifest perspective, silence allows for the clarification of intention. A mind that is constantly talking, thinking, and reacting cannot clearly discern what it wants. But silence filters out unnecessary thoughts, bringing the essence to the forefront. This is why some people feel uncomfortable when they are silent, because the mind begins to reveal itself unfiltered for the first time. However, once this discomfort is overcome, inner harmony and clarity emerge, This can be easily observed in daily life. Being alone before making an important decision, not speaking for a while, or simply observing the surroundings slows down the pace of thought. This slowing down is not actually a weakness. It is a prerequisite for the mind to work more deeply and accurately. The silence here is not a passive state, but an active preparation. Therefore, silence is one of the most powerful triggers of manifestation, because the calmer the mind, the clearer the internal signals become. When the noise disappears, what remains is not emptiness, but wisdom. And often, true transformation begins precisely in this silent space. Chapter 7. Is consciousness a system of regulation or a mechanism of desire? Intention, focus, and internal regulation. Most people see consciousness as a mental tool used to desire something. We think, we desire, we repeat, and we wait for the result. But consciousness is not such a simple and one-way mechanism. Consciousness works more like a system of regulation. It regulates the frequency, attention, and meaning in our inner world. More important than what we desire is the state of our inner order. Because desires made while the mind is scattered are not powerful, they are noisy. You may not know what you really want, and in the meantime, you may desire the wrong things you don't really need, and these can consume your time and energy. The key concept here is intention. Intention is different from a simple wish. It is a state of direction setting, like a compass. A compass doesn't show you the way, it only determines the direction. Consciousness doesn't force events. It chooses which opportunities to notice and which possibilities to ignore by adjusting attention in a particular direction. Therefore, two people in the same environment experience completely different results. Their settings are different. One finds good in evil, the other seeks and finds evil in good. Focus is the active part of this adjustment system. But focus isn't just about looking at something. What's important here is temporarily putting everything else in the background. When consciousness achieves this, mental energy is not divided, and inner order is established. This order is reflected in behaviors, reactions, and even body language. People unconsciously begin to make decisions that are consistent with the state of consciousness they are attuned to. Many seemingly obvious situations are actually the natural result of these harmonious chains of decision-making. However, internal order is the most important point and is often overlooked. It's common to ignore the contradictions within ourselves while trying to change the external world. To desire something, on the one hand, while harboring fear, guilt, or feelings of worthlessness related to it on the other, disrupts the system of harmony. Consciousness cannot determine a clear direction without resolving this contradiction. Therefore, internal simplification precedes external outcomes. Herein lies the wisdom. Consciousness is not a tool used to forcibly rearrange the universe. It is a quiet but central point where one aligns oneself on a larger scale. This alignment occurs not through effort, but over time. The clearer the harmony, the more subtle the perception. And as perception becomes more subtle, one begins to discern not only what is happening, but also when and how to store it abundantly. Opportunities that arise at this point are often perceived as extraordinary or miracle. These are, in essence, perfectly timed responses of consciousness. Life responds with the same clarity only when the conscious mind stops wanting and learns to adapt. Because wanting often creates tension. When the mind has a certain resilience, it develops resistance to the fact that the outcome hasn't yet occurred. But adaptation means not continuing, dropping attention. When you adapt to the process, events begin to align in the order they should be. This alignment appears as external opportunities. It's an inevitable flow of internal ills. This is precisely where a cycle that people often experience comes into play. In some cases, we resist by trying to open the same closed loop with different keys because it's not working. We try different approaches. We push ourselves. We take our time. We live our dreams. And we struggle with increasing stress. But what is often overlooked is this. The problem isn't the method. It might be the timing. Some things haven't been resolved yet because they haven't been worked on yet. But this isn't a failure. It's just an early encounter. Stopping at this point isn't a step backward. It's a subtle move. The mindset is relaxed when it asks this question. Okay, this isn't happening right now, but what if it were? This question goes beyond simply forcing the mind, and possibilities are moved into the realm of possibilities. The issue is no longer how to force it, but what changes will these changes bring? And it is precisely at this moment of change that consciousness relaxes, resists. Sometimes a problem arises not to be solved, but to change direction. While a person is progressing in another area, solving another problem, or simply waiting, they realize that the event they previously resisted has almost been resolved. But this is not a coincidence. This is the moment when consciousness is now at the right frequency. Because some doors close when forced, they open when released. Perhaps what matters isn't the problem itself, but what happens afterward. Because life often gives the answers directly. It first directs a person down a different path. And when a person looks back, they realize, if I hadn't resisted then, I wouldn't be where I am today. This is why harmony is more powerful than control. The less consciousness forces, the greater the probability that events will occur in the right place at the right time. And true wisdom begins when a person finally understands this. Not everything needs to happen immediately, but what is meant to happen will inevitably happen when its time comes. Chapter 8. Why sometimes? Manifestation happens in such a frightening way. Time perception, expectation, disruption, and synchronicity. Sometimes something happens and a person thinks, how is this possible? Because the event transcends the timeline created by the mind and instantly pushes the boundaries of reality. Such moments are both fascinating and frightening for most people, because what is experienced is not only the fulfillment of a wish, but also a disruption of one's perception of time. We believe that time is linear and constant. We live on a line where the past is behind us and the future has not yet arrived. However, in moments when manifestation occurs rapidly, this line is suddenly broken, and we realize that the universe operates not with time, but with a network of possible events. First, we need to understand this. The mind governs perception, not reality. In other words, how fast an event occurs is usually determined not by the external world, but by our internal measurement of time. The time the mind expects is not always the same as the time it takes for the universe to bring about a possible outcome. Therefore, manifestation is sometimes slow and sometimes frighteningly fast, because the speed of the universe is independent of the speed of our perception of time. These rapid manifestations often stem from a disruption of expectations. People believe that achieving a goal requires a certain process, because this is the correct framework that society has taught us. In school, at work, in relationships, we always see the same cycle: goal to effort to result. This is a model, and it works in most cases. However, sometimes manifestation invalidates this model and instantly initiates the goal to result process. This breaks down the security wall in our minds and shakes our sense of control. Because we are accustomed to the idea that results spread out over time, whereas sometimes the universe reveals the result not over time, but beyond time. This is precisely where synchronicity comes into play. Synchronicity isn't just a series of coincidences. It's the alignment of the universe with the moment the mind instantly recognizes as the right time. This is what Carl Jung described as meaningful coincidence. And these moments shake the mind so quickly that one may feel their life is being arranged by an external hand. This feeling itself is a clue as to why the speed of manifestation is so frightening. Another important factor is the alignment of the mind's frequency with the frequency of the universe. When the mind focuses on a particular thought, it radiates it like a frequency. This frequency opens a channel in the universe's network of possibilities. If this channel coincides with the right frequency at the right time, the chain of events instantly accelerates. This is similar to a musical instrument suddenly increasing its vibration when it plays the correct note. Therefore, rapid manifestation is, in a sense, a perfect alignment of frequency. This both excites and frightens people because it seems like a matching energy event, not something the individual can control. Another reason why rapid manifestations are frightening is that they make one aware of their own responsibility. When something happens suddenly, the question arises internally: did I create this? This question is both liberating and a crucial truth, because the person realizes that their thoughts can affect not only their inner world, but also the outer world. This awareness is like discovering an uncontrollable force, and this discovery often leads to fear. Finally, a state of preparation often lies behind rapid manifestation. Sometimes, unconsciously, the person becomes ready to accept a particular outcome. This preparation may not be a conscious effort, but a regulation of the subconscious. The mind may not consciously desire a goal, but at a subconscious level, it can make that goal ready. This can explain the results that appear suddenly and unexpectedly, because the universe responds to us when we are ready, not when we expect it. In short, the reason why manifestation is sometimes frighteningly fast is that it makes us realize that time is not a linear line. The shattering of our expectations, the activation of synchronicity, the alignment of frequencies, and a sudden surge in a person's sense of responsibility. These moments remind us that we are part of a larger system, and this reminder is sometimes so powerful that it is both fascinating and frightening. Chapter 9. Does the mind choose reality, not create it? Possibilities, moments of decision, and shifting direction. One of the most common beliefs about the mind is that it creates reality. However, upon closer examination, it becomes increasingly clear that the mind's role is not to build a world from scratch, but to choose a particular path from the sea of possibilities that already exist. While modern physics tells us that the universe is composed not of a single certainty, but of countless possibilities existing simultaneously, the human mind acts like a subtle filter that determines which of these possibilities will become experience. In other words, The mind is more like a curator than a painter. All the paintings are there, but it decides which one will be hung on the wall. The small moments of decision-making we experience every day are silent but effective examples of this selection mechanism. Two people waking up on the same morning in the same city, under the same circumstances, can be swept in completely different directions in life. Because one person values a conversation while another ignores it, one boldly approaches an opportunity while another retreats in fear. At this point, reality ceases to be an externally imposed scenario. It becomes a path shaped by signals the mind pays attention to, finds meaningful, and labels as important to me. Possibilities often appear to people as an abstract concept. However, in reality, even without realizing it, we begin to experience one of many alternatives at any given moment. Neuroscience shows that the brain processes millions of pieces of information per second, but consciousness only selects and makes visible a very small fraction of them. This selection forms the basis of our perception of reality. Things we don't see don't cease to exist. They simply haven't been selected. Therefore, what we sometimes call chance is actually the mind becoming aware of a possibility it had previously overlooked. Moments of decision-making are the true turning points in this process. Most people think that major breakthroughs, sudden events, or dramatic decisions shape their lives. However, choices are the small, essential pieces of an individual's perspective, the missing whole pieces. Whether you pursue an idea, nurture an emotion, take a fear seriously, or confront it, one of these subtly shifts your mental compass in a different direction. This change doesn't initially cause a commotion. Life doesn't turn upside down overnight. But as time goes on, these small deviations accumulate and create a powerful enough landscape to make you wonder all day long, how did my life get here? Herein lies a crucial distinction. The mind is not a creator. It is a guide. It doesn't build all the paths, but it determines your direction. It links your mental journey to the thought you repeat, the possibility you take seriously, the fear you accept as real. And over time, life begins to reveal these details to you. This isn't magic. These are the natural consequences of continuity. Therefore, the thing to do is not to try to change everything at once. What you can do is do it on a small scale, right now. Small differences will emerge, because small differences grow as long as they are sustained. Big leaks usually tire people. Small but follow-up steps are mentally persuasive. The mind is made up of signals, not revolutions. For example, sometimes even just coming together in a different way, just for the sake of experimentation, changes the direction of the mind. Moving to a new house is one of the strongest examples of this. However, this may not always be possible. Then do something simpler. Stay for a few days in an accessible, not excessively expensive hotel. Make it your home. Wake up there in the mornings. Think there. Spend time with yourself there. Don't imagine yourself in a bigger, more comfortable life. Even for a few days, you can afford that. Because the mind doesn't make as clear a distinction between imagination and experience as we think. Here, luxury doesn't mean ostentation. Luxury is the emergence of a reflection of memory. The moment a different rhythm, a different place, a different experience is lived, the mental compass begins to seriously consider a new perspective. And here's the surprising thing. For most people, this difference is seen in the first few days. The perspective changes. Appearances soften. possibilities become clearer. And when we look back, we have almost no regrets except, I wish I had done this sooner. The most critical point in doing this is, do it without forcing yourself. Don't constantly narrow your mind with thoughts like, I didn't have enough money. Now isn't the right time. Do I deserve this? Because these thoughts sabotage everything you do from start to finish. When the mind relaxes, it expands. And when it expands, it begins to choose new possibilities. Remember, it's not how much money you spend on the struggle, but what you see in yourself that matters. Ultimately, life is shaped not by one big decision, but by small choices where perspective is constantly adjusted. The mind doesn't create the path, it chooses the path. Whichever direction, you take small but gradual steps. Time will broaden that path. And one day, when you look back, you will realize that the change didn't happen overnight, but rather began imperceptibly. Perhaps the most striking truth is this: reality is not a single line, but a branching roadmap, and the mind constantly traverses the intersections on this map. We are often unaware of which direction we are turning, but each turn determines the next landscape. From this perspective, the power of the mind lies not in forcibly changing the world, but in deciding which world to live in. And this decision is far quieter, far more subtle, yet just as decisive as we imagine. Chapter 10. The real question: are we ready, or do we just want? Responsibility, awareness, and conscious choice. One of the greatest misconceptions of the human mind is thinking, I can do anything I want. However, in real life, the limits of most things are determined not by the power of desire, but by whether desire is combined with responsibility. Because connecting with the universe is not just about dreaming or setting a goal. It is a process of inner transformation, and this transformation reveals the difference between wanting and being ready. Often, people want something to happen, but they haven't yet acquired the necessary habits, discipline, and courage to bring that desire into their lives. But the universe is not a wish box. It is more like a mirror, and what it reflects is determined by what you can actually carry. At this point, the word being ready doesn't just mean physical preparation. Being ready requires emotional maturity, mental clarity, and inner discipline. Because if consciousness is a system, it's not possible to change it with good intentions alone. The settings need to be readjusted. This refers to a regular process of cleansing, restructuring, and conscious choice within a person's world of thoughts and feelings. The most difficult part of this process isn't giving up old habits, but accepting that they give us a sense of security. Because the human mind can perceive change as a threat, habits, even if wrong, create a kind of security wall. We often magnify our images. These only provide short-term gratification. Sometimes, a single moment of motivation is enough to achieve a goal. But what is needed for the goal to become a natural part of our lives is small, consistent steps taken in the same direction every day. Therefore, the idea of connecting with the universe is not a grand dream, a sudden leap, or a dramatic transformation as many people think. Rather, it is a chain of small disciplines woven together without being noticed. Because the time it takes for something to happen is usually not about how much we can encompass, but about how prepared we are. Preparation is a critical unifying factor here. For example, imagine you want to buy a car. You think about it for months. look at options, compare prices, but you can't make a decision. Perhaps you'll never know exactly which car you want. Because the problem isn't money or an abundance of options. It's more about price increases and knowing exactly what will satisfy you economically. I've experienced this firsthand, keeping it to myself. You think, you evaluate options, but clarity doesn't emerge. Because the problem isn't really the car. It's about changing your current driving habits. And here lies a truth that most people don't realize. Every person has a deeply rooted value system. These values are shaped by near-death experiences, disappointments, traumas, and survival reflexes. What truly makes us happy is often not what we perceive on the surface. The real problem is the difference in these fundamental values. Because performances change, changes change, but values remain constant for a long time. The car example is just a small part of this. The same applies when starting a family, choosing a job, or deciding where to live. If the foundations aren't solid, making choices becomes difficult, and even after making a decision, a constant unease remains. Because you can't be sure what's right and what's wrong. Many people, after making a decision, wonder, did I make the wrong decision? They ask, why? They live with the question, why? But often the problem isn't the decision itself, but a lack of understanding of the inner need that led to the decision. For some, the most valuable thing is freedom. Being able to stand on their own 2 feet to make their own decisions. For others, it's security, a structured life, predictability, stability. For some, it's meaning, feeling useful in their work, leaving a mark. If you recognize this fundamental value, defining it will make the decision a little more difficult. But solutions that align with your values will allow your life to flow more naturally and smoothly. There's a very powerful criterion here, and a quote I recently came across perfectly illustrates it. If something is right for you, it energizes you. That's how you know if something is right for you. This seemingly simple sentence is actually a profound compass. If something is constantly draining you, if your life is becoming exhausting, if it's a mental burden, either it's not the right time or there's something else that needs to be done right now. Because things that truly meet your needs, even if they are challenging, create a sense of vitality within you. They inspire the desire to continue even when you are tired. They don't narrow the mind. On the contrary, they broaden it. Therefore, the idea of harmony with the universe isn't about attracting something from the outside. It's about recognizing what the body is in harmony with. Desires are temporary, but goals aligned with values are permanent. And that's exactly what we're preparing for. Recognizing our own inner order. What empowers you and what merely distracts you? What energizes you and what slowly depletes you? The answers aren't outside. They lie in the weight or lightness of the decisions you make. And when this difference begins to emerge, many things will correct themselves. Another critical point is this. Being prepared also means bearing responsibility. If the mind is a system and our choices affect reality, then every thought and feeling affects not only us, but also our environment. Therefore, the idea of connecting with the universe becomes not a personal power, but a personal responsibility. Because when a person transforms their inner world, they also affect the energy, relationships, and events around them. This effect is sometimes visible, sometimes invisible, but it is always present. The hardest thing here is asking ourselves, how ready am I for this? The moment we say, I want this, because people often want something to be great, but they don't want the change that comes with it. For example, it's easy to want a more peaceful life, but it's difficult to want the inner discipline, boundary setting, and confrontation processes that bring peace. That's why many people like the idea of a better life, but they don't want to pay the price. And that price is often honestly confronting our inner selves. However, readiness is also a matter of awareness, because making a conscious choice isn't just about choosing the right thing, but also about understanding your true motivation. Knowing how willing you are to achieve a goal is crucial to understanding whether that goal will truly nourish you. Because sometimes people pursue something, but that thing serves not their true needs, but societal expectations or ego desires. In this case, connecting with the universe isn't just about gaining more power, but also about becoming a process of greater self-awareness. And perhaps the most important truth is this: readiness isn't something that happens instantly. It's a process. In this process, one tests oneself with small choices. Waking up in the morning and controlling your mind, noticing where your attention is focused, directing your thoughts, observing your emotions, and asking yourself, what am I choosing right now, are all parts of this process. Because real change doesn't happen like a big bang, but through a chain of small choices repeated every day. Ultimately, the real question isn't, do we want this? The real question should be, are we truly capable of handling this? Because connecting with the universe is not a luxury, but a responsibility. And this responsibility awaits being chosen again, not just once, but every day. If we are ready, the possibilities the universe offers us expand. But if we only desire one thing, these possibilities will eventually exhaust us, and we will return to the old normal framework. So, can you honestly answer this question? Do you really want this? Or are you just dreaming?